The town of Promise Creek was a lie baked into the cracked Montana mud. It was 1883, and the wind that scoured the prairie had forgotten the meaning of mercy. It tore at the half-finished steeple of the church, whistled through the gaps in the general store's new glass, and clawed at the graying boards of Clara Markham's cabin on the edge of the settlement. Clara knew the taste of that lie. She had swallowed it for 2 years, ever since the night they took her husband, Markham, and stretched his neck on the cottonwood tree south of the creek for stealing a horse. They said. Clara's hands, raw from lye soap and needlework, paused over the torn seam of a miner's canvas trousers. Markham had been many things: a man with a temper, a man soured by drought, a man who sometimes looked at her like she was a stranger. But a horse thief? He loved horses, loved the feel of them, the smell of them. He would never have taken one that wasn't his. The thought was a cold, smooth stone she turned over and over in her mind. Even as the rest of the town buried the memory, she was the widow of a hanged man. That was her name now. Her cabin sat where the town's weak pulse gave out, where the prairie grass took back the land. It was small, just one room and a loft, smelling of wood smoke and the sharp scent of the starch she used on the shirts of men who would not look her in the eye. She worked. That was all she did. She took in mending. She washed linens for the saloon girls, paid in coin left under a rock on her porch, never face to face, and she kept her eyes on the dirt path before her. She avoided the saloon, the center of town, the places where laughter sounded too loud and brittle. The whispers followed her anyway. When she walked to the general store for flour and thread, the women clustered by the pickle barrel would fall silent, their eyes like hard little buttons on a boot. They pulled their children closer, as if shame were a fever she might pass to them. The cruelest cut had come from Pastor Gideon. 2 Sundays past. She had put on her one good dress, the dark blue wool, and walked to the church, desperate for an hour of peace, for a word that was not a judgment. He had met her on the steps, his hands steepled, blocking the way. He did not raise his voice. He was a man who drowned you in soft tones. "Clara," he'd said, his gaze fixed on the broken plank at her feet. "Perhaps this Sunday. It is not wise. Pastor, I only want to pray. The flock, Clara, they are tender. The memory, it is still raw. Your presence, it agitates." "My presence? Or my husband's grave?" He finally looked at her, his eyes clear and cold as creek water in winter. "The Lord asks for repentance. The town looks for a sign of it. They see only stubbornness." "He didn't do it," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "That is between him and God now," the pastor said, his voice finalizing the matter. "The church is a place for comfort, my child, not for disruption. Perhaps next month, when the hearts of the community have healed." He had turned then and walked into the house of God, leaving her on the steps with the wind whipping her skirts, her soul as barred from entry as her body. She had not been back. She had not been anywhere. Her world was the cabin, the creek for water, the small patch of weeds she called a garden, and the lonely path to the edge of the general store. It was a small, gray life, until the man on the starving horse rode in. He arrived not like a man, but like a piece of the prairie itself, a tumbleweed of dust and leather. Elias. She would learn his name later. But at first, he was just a shape, a presence that did not belong. He rode into Promise Creek in the late afternoon, when the sun was a hot orange smear in the west. He did not ride down the center of the street. He hugged the edge, his horse, a gaunt bay mare with one weeping eye, walking on the very last of its strength. The man was no better. He was worn to the bone, half-starved by the look of him. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the gray dust caked in his beard and the deep lines etched around his mouth. He looked like he had been drifting for weeks, moving from one bad patch of luck to the next. He didn't stop at the saloon, though the piano was already tinkling its false welcome. He didn't stop at the stable. He just kept riding, slow, until he reached the end of town, near the abandoned barn that sat on the edge of her property line. It was a ruin, its back broken by a winter storm years ago. She watched him from her window, the needle poised in her hand. He sat on the horse for a long minute, just staring at the barn, as if asking its permission. Then he slid from the saddle, his knees buckling slightly when he hit the ground. He led the horse into the relative shelter of the collapsed structure. She waited for him to come to her door, to ask for water, or food, or work. Beggars came, drifters came. She usually sent them away with a hard word. She had nothing left to give, but this man did not come. She worked until the light failed, her shoulders aching. When she stepped outside to throw her basin of gray water onto the dust, she saw him. He was at her fence, not her cabin fence, but the line fence for the small pasture she no longer kept animals in. A section of it had been down since spring. He was fixing it. He had no new wood, but he was using the fallen posts, setting them back into the ground with a heavy rock he used as a tamper. The sound was dull, final. Thud, thud, thud. He worked in the twilight, a tall, scarred silhouette against the dying sky. He was paying for his shelter. She realized. An exchange. He didn't want to be beholden. She went inside and bolted the door. The next day, the heat was heavy, pressing down on the prairie like a hot iron. Her lye soap was gone, and she needed to cut more yucca root down by the stream. She took her bucket and a small hatchet, her mind on her inventory, not on the stranger in the barn. The stream was low, barely a whisper of water over the stones, shaded by a stand of thirsty cottonwoods. She knelt by the bank, setting her bucket in the trickle to fill, and began digging at a tough root. A splash. She froze. It was not the sound of a deer. It was too heavy, too deliberate. She rose slowly, the hatchet in her hand. She moved through the scrub brush, her heart a dry knocking in her chest. He was there, in a pool just deep enough to cover his hips. His back was to her. He was bathing, scrubbing the weeks of trail dust from his skin. He was shirtless, his torn pants soaked at the waist. She saw his hat and shirt in a neat pile on the bank. She should have turned. She should have made a sound, announced herself, and fled. But she was paralyzed. His back was a map of a hard life. A long, puckered scar ran from his left shoulder blade down to his ribs. The work of a knife. Another, smaller scar, round and deep, was dug into his shoulder. A bullet hole. War. Maybe. Or just a bad argument. His hair was dark with sweat and water, and as he dipped his head back to rinse it, she saw the hard muscle in his shoulders and arms. He turned, not quickly, but with a sudden, animal awareness. He had heard her, or smelled her, or simply felt her gaze. He didn't duck. He didn't scramble to cover himself. He just stood there, the water sluicing down his chest, and looked at her. His face was worse than his back. A scar, white and jagged, cut through his right eyebrow and pulled the corner of his eye into a permanent, cynical squint. His knuckles were busted. He was not a handsome man. He was a man who had been used hard by the world and had used it just as hard in return. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was a low gravel, unused. Clara felt the heat rise in her neck, a flush of anger and embarrassment. This is my stream," she said, her voice sounding thin and foolish. "Water's free," he replied, making no move to leave it. He simply watched her, his eyes unblinking. They were a strange color, a pale hazel that looked almost gray in the flat light. "You're on my property. Fixed your fence," he said, as if this settled all accounts. He reached for a rough cloth on the bank and began to dry his face, his movements slow, deliberate. She was the one who was exposed, standing there with her hatchet in her bucket. He was the one half naked, but he held all the power in the moment. "You'll be moving on," she said. It was not a question. "Soon," he said. He finished drying his hair and, with no shame at all, bent to wring out his shirt. Clara turned and fled. She did not run, but she walked so fast she nearly tripped on the path back to her cabin. Her hands were shaking. It was not fear. It was something else. The sight of him. The raw, unapologetic maleness of him. It had been 2 years since Markham, 2 years since any man had been near her. She found herself gripping the hatchet handle, her knuckles white. That evening, she made a stew, mostly potatoes and a little salt pork. It was thin, but it was hot. She ladled a bowl of it and cut a thick slice of her bread. She opened her cabin door and looked toward the barn. The sun was gone. A single, weak lantern flame glowed in the darkness of the ruin. She walked out, her boots kicking up dust. She did not go to the barn door. She stopped at the fence line he had mended. She set the bowl on the top post and the bread beside it. She turned and walked back. She didn't look to see if he was watching, but she felt his eyes on her back the entire way. That night, she dreamed of Markham. It was always the same dream, the same memory. It wasn't a good memory. It was the last one. The smell of whiskey, sharp and sour in the small cabin. The lantern was burning too high, the flames smoking. Markham was pacing, his boots loud on the wood floor. "They're not just going to take it, Clara," he'd said, his voice too loud. Hatcher and his bank, they're not just going to take this land. "Markham, please," she'd begged, sitting on the cot, her hands twisting in her lap. "Don't go into town tonight. You're not well. You've been drinking." "I'm fine," he snapped. "I just need to talk to them, make them see." Then the sound, shouting outside, the heavy thud of boots on her porch. Markham's head snapped up. His eyes, which she had once thought were kind, were just frantic. He looked at her, but he didn't see her. "Stay inside. Clara, don't come out. Markham, no!" The door was thrown open. It wasn't the sheriff. It was Hatcher, the man who owned the general store and the bank, and behind him, the Taggart brothers, men who worked as muscle when the law was too slow. "Markham," Hatcher said, his voice pleasant. "We just want to talk about that horse, the one that went missing from the livery." "I don't know what you're talking about," Markham said, but the lie was plain on his face. "Don't go," Clara whispered, a terrible cold gripping her heart. "Please don't go with them." Markham looked at her. His face softened for just a moment. He stepped toward her, touched her cheek. His hand was rough. "I'll come back for you," he whispered. "I promise, I'll come back." He turned and walked out the door, into the arms of the men waiting. She woke with a start. Her own breath caught in her throat. The cabin was dark. The cot was empty. He had not come back. They had not let him. She had found his body in the morning, turning slow in the dawn breeze from the cottonwood. A final, terrible warning from the men who ran Promise Creek. She lay there, listening to the silence. No, not silence. The wind. And something else. A faint sound from the barn. A cough, low and ragged. He was still there. The loneliness of her small cabin felt suddenly heavier. The walls closer. There were 2 of them now. 2 outcasts, breathing the same cold night air. Elias kept to himself. He was a ghost in the barn, a shadow she would see at dusk, mending a piece of his saddle or tending to his mare, rubbing her down with handfuls of dry grass. He did not come near the cabin again. She left food on the fence post, bread, a few boiled eggs. He left, in exchange, a pile of chopped firewood by her door, cut neatly and stacked high. The silence between them was a taut wire. She would find herself watching him from her window. He moved with a heavy, pained grace, his body remembering injuries. He went to town once. She saw him walk down the main street, his shoulders set, his hat low. He went into the general store. He was in there for a long time. When he came out, Hatcher, the store owner, was standing in the doorway, watching him go. Hatcher's face was pale. Elias walked back, a small bag in his hand. Tobacco, she guessed. He passed the saloon, where 2 ranchers were standing on the boardwalk. They saw him. They saw the scars. They stepped back, letting him pass. He came back to the barn and did not leave again for 2 days. But he had seen it. In that one trip, he had seen how the town looked at her. She was at her woodpile, gathering chips for the stove, when Mr. Davies from the next claim over rode past. He was a man who fancied himself important. He slowed his horse. "Afternoon, Widow Markham," he called out, his eyes traveling over her, lingering on her bodice. "Working hard, I see. Mr. Davies," she said, not stopping her work. "Lonely out here," he said, his voice slick. "A woman like you, all alone. It ain't right. You need a man's protection. I need to light my stove. Mr. Davies, good day." He chuckled, a wet, ugly sound. "Stubborn, just like your husband. Got him killed. That stubbornness." She froze, her hand full of kindling. "You think about my offer," he said. "A few chores at my place, a little comfort. I'd make sure you were taken care of." She turned and looked at him, her face a cold mask. "Get off my land." His face darkened. "You'll be begging soon enough, widow. That pretty face won't last forever in this wind." He spurred his horse and rode off. She stood there, shaking, her fingers digging into the wood chips. She looked toward the barn. Elias was standing in the shadows, perfectly still. He had heard, he had seen. He just watched Davies ride away, his face unreadable. Then he turned and melted back into the darkness of the barn. The rain started that night. It was not a gentle spring rain. It was a cold, driving Montana storm, a deluge that turned the dust to thick, grasping mud. The wind howled, rattling the single window of Clara's cabin. She sat by her stove, patching one of her own thin blankets, the sound of the storm filling the world. She thought of the horse in the ruined barn. Then she thought of the man. The barn roof was half gone. He would be soaked. He would be cold. She told herself it was not her concern. He was a drifter. He had fixed her fence. The account was settled. But the image of him, shivering in the dark, stayed with her. It was the image of her own loneliness, mirrored. The wind hammered the door. She looked up, startled. It wasn't the wind. It was a fist. No, not a fist. A thud. A weight. She grabbed the iron poker from the stove, her heart leaping. "Who's there?" Only the wind answered. She waited. Another sound. A scraping, like a boot dragging on the wood. She crept to the door. The poker raised. She eased the bar back and cracked the door open an inch. At first, she saw nothing but the black, driving rain. Then she looked down. He was on her porch, collapsed against the door, half conscious. A dark shape soaked to the bone. An empty whiskey bottle lay on the ground beside him, its contents spilled into the mud. "You," she breathed. He had passed out, drunk and cold, right outside her door. He hadn't been trying to get in. He had been trying to get somewhere, and the porch was as far as he'd made it. She stared at him. The town would let him die. Davies would laugh. Pastor Gideon would preach a sermon on the sins of vagrancy. She hated them. She hated the cold, righteous cruelty of this town. "Damn you," she whispered. It was not clear who she was damning. The man, the town, herself. She put the poker down. She opened the door wide, the wind and rain blasting into her warm cabin. He was heavy, a dead weight. She grabbed him under the arms, her feet slipping in the mud he'd tracked onto her porch, and she dragged him. It was a desperate, ugly struggle. He was all bone and wet muscle. She grunted, her back screaming, and pulled him over the threshold, out of the worst of the storm. He fell onto her rag rug, a sodden, broken heap, smelling of whiskey and wet wool. He was shivering, a deep, rattling shudder that shook his whole body. His skin was pale, his lips blue. She slammed the door against the storm and barred it. She stood over him, breathing hard, rain dripping from her own hair. "Idiot," she said to him. "You absolute fool." He moaned, but his eyes didn't open. She couldn't leave him on the floor. He'd freeze. But she couldn't put him in her bed. The cot. She looked at the small cot where she slept. Then she looked at the sea chest at the foot of it. She went to it, her hands unsteady. She lifted the lid. The smell of cedar and memory hit her. She reached inside, past her mother's lace, past the small bundle of baby clothes she kept hidden. She pulled it out. Markham's winter coat. It was heavy, dark wool, lined with sheepskin. She had not been able to burn it. She had not been able to throw it away. She dragged the man, Elias, to the warmest part of the cabin, near the stove. He was too heavy to lift. She knelt beside him, her dress soaking up the water from his clothes, with rough, impersonal movements. She unbuttoned his soaked jacket and pulled it off him. His shirt beneath was thin. She covered him with her husband's coat. It was a strange, terrible moment, a burial and a betrayal all in one. The coat was huge on him, swallowing his broken frame. She built up the fire in the stove until it was roaring, throwing heat into the small room. She sat on her stool, her back to him, and listened to two sounds: the rain hammering the roof, and the sound of the stranger shivering in her dead husband's coat. Hours passed. The storm raged. The shivering finally subsided, replaced by the low, steady sound of breathing. She turned, just once, to look at him. In his sleep, with the whiskey and the cold drained from him, his face was different. The scars were still there, but the hardness was gone. He looked younger. He looked, she thought, desperately tired, like a man who had been running for 1,000 miles and had finally, blessedly, fallen. Her silence, which had been a shield, felt different. It was no longer empty. It was shared. She sat and watched him, the wind howling, the stove ticking, and the long, cold night slowly turning toward a gray and uncertain dawn. The shift was as quiet as snow settling. When the light came, he was awake. He was sitting up, his back against the wall, the coat folded neatly beside him. He was watching her. She was asleep in her chair, her head slumped. His movement woke her. She straightened, her neck stiff, her heart kicking once, hard. He didn't say, "Thank you." He looked at the folded coat, then at her. His gray hazel eyes were clear now, and cold with a deep, hollow shame. "You shouldn't have," he rasped. "You'd have frozen," she said, her voice stiff. "You'd have been dead on my porch." Maybe that was the point. She stood up, smoothing her apron, putting the defenses of the day back on. "I'm not the town, mister. I don't leave men to die in the rain." She went to the stove and stirred the embers. She added new wood. The silence stretched. "I boiled coffee," she said, her back to him. It was not forgiveness. It was not kindness. It was just a fact. But it was more than either of them had had in a long time. He stood up, slowly, favoring his left side. He looked at the coat. He looked at her. "Elias," he said. She turned. "What? My name? It's Elias." She nodded once. "Clara." He picked up his wet jacket, which she had hung by the stove. It was still damp. He didn't put it on. He just held it. He walked to the door, unbarred it, and stepped out onto the porch. The world was a mess of mud, the sky a bruised purple. He stood there for a long moment. She brought him a tin cup of black coffee. He took it. His rough, scarred fingers brushed hers. It was a jolt, like touching metal in a lightning storm. Neither of them pulled away. They just stood in the cold morning air, the storm broken. The silence between them, something new, something fragile, and something terribly, terribly quiet. The sky turned the color of a fresh bruise, and the wind, which had only been a whisper, began to show its teeth. A new storm was coming, not just rain, but the white-toothed bite of a blizzard. Clara stood at her window, watching the first hard pellets of snow ice rattle against the glass. He was in the barn, or what was left of it. She had watched him shore up the one remaining wall with fallen timbers, creating a lean-to for his mare. But it was not shelter. It was a grave of old hay and broken wood. She thought of him on her floor, shivering in her husband's coat. She thought of the town, of Pastor Gideon's hard eyes, of Mr. Davies's wet smile. She put on her shawl, braced herself, and walked into the wind. He was there, inside the lean-to, standing with the horse, rubbing its neck to keep it calm. The mare whinnied, low, smelling the storm. "Elias!" she shouted over the rising shriek of the wind. He turned. His face was set, already resigned to the cold. "You can't stay here," she said, the words torn from her mouth. "I've weathered worse. Not in this. This will kill the horse, and you with it, the barn." She pointed to the small, sturdy structure behind her cabin. Not the ruin he was in. The one with the good roof. Take her in there. He looked at her. His eyes narrowed, searching for the catch. "And you?" she pressed. You can sleep in the barn. Too, it's warmer. I'll leave the door unlatched." She didn't wait for his answer. She turned and fought her way back to the cabin, the snow already stinging her cheeks. She felt his eyes on her, a weight against her back. He did not come to the cabin, but in the morning, after the first wave of the storm had passed, she saw new, deep footprints leading from the good barn to her woodpile. And so, a routine began. As silent and stark as the snow-covered land, Clara allowed him to stay. The blizzard did not break. It settled in, a siege of ice and wind that cut them off from the world. For days, the town of Promise Creek was just a few smudges of smoke on the horizon, a place that no longer existed. Elias moved from the ruin to her small, sturdy barn. He was a creature of singular purpose. He did not speak of his past. He did not speak of the future. He paid his rent in labor. He began, as he always did, with the wood. Her axe was dull, its handle loose. She watched from the window as he sat on a stump, took a file from his saddlebag, and began to sharpen it. His movements were patient, practiced. He set the edge with a whetstone, spitting on it, his head bent, his dark hair falling over his scarred brow. Then he fixed the handle, whittling a new wedge to secure the head. When he was done, he did not just chop, he became a machine. The steady, percussive thud of the axe on oak was the new rhythm of their lives. He cut, he split, he stacked. He built a wall of firewood against her cabin that was higher than her head. When the wood was done, he fixed her tools, the hinge on her gate, the leather on her water bucket's handle, which he restitched with a sinewy thread. He moved with a quiet competence that was almost unnerving. He was a man who understood how broken things worked, how to put them back together. But he did not talk. He was a wall of silence, a ghost who performed chores. Clara, trapped inside her cabin, found herself adrift in memories, pulled under by the heavy, silent current of the past. She was mending one of her own thin shifts, the needle pulling, when she found herself thinking of Markham's hands. At first, they had been kind. When he had courted her, back in Ohio, his hands were the hands of a farmer, large, calloused, but gentle. He had touched her hair once, as if it were spun glass, but the prairie had changed him. The drought of '81 had changed him. The failed crop had broken something in him. She remembered the dust. It was in everything, in the water, in the bread, on their skin, in their beds. It was a gritty reminder of their failure. The land they had bought with all her savings was useless, baked hard as brick. Markham's touch became rough. It was the touch of a man grasping, not a man holding. He would grip her arm, his fingers digging in. "We just need more time, Clara," he'd say, his voice strained. Just one good rain. But the rain didn't come, and the bank, run by Hatcher, did. The town turned on them. They were the failures, the ones who couldn't make it, the ones who had brought their bad luck with them. Markham's bitterness grew, a poison in his blood. He started drinking. He started looking at her not as a wife, but as another mouth to feed, another weight on his back. His touch, she shivered, though the stove was hot. His touch had become a thing to be endured. He would take her in the dark, in a fury of desperation and whiskey, his movements hard, his breath sour. It was not love. It was a claiming, a desperate, angry staking of the one thing he had left. She looked out the window. Elias was testing the new handle on the gate, his movements economical. He was a man of scars and violence. She knew. She had seen his back, but his hands, on the wood, on the leather, were steady. She set her mending down, her fingers trembling. She didn't know which man frightened her more. One morning, the blizzard broke. The world was a blinding, pristine white. the sun a pale coin in a frozen sky. It was a false thaw, the cold still so deep it cracked the air, but the wind had died. Clara seized the chance. She had to wash. She filled her big copper pot, heating water on the stove until the cabin was thick with steam. She hauled the pot and her washboard outside, her feet sinking deep in the snow. She had a clothesline strung between two posts, and she set to work, her hands raw in the icy water, scrubbing the lye soap into the few things she owned. She was hanging her last shift, the steam rising from the wet cloth. When she felt it, the feeling of being watched, she did not turn. Her body went perfectly still. He was at the woodpile, the axe in his hand. He was just watching her. The wind was low, but it was there. It picked up her old wool dress, pressing the damp cloth against her legs, her hips, her thighs. It was not a seductive garment. It was a shroud. But in that moment, she was terribly aware of the shape of her body beneath it. She felt a strange, hot pulse in her throat. She fumbled the clothespin, dropping it into the snow. She bent to get it, her back to him, and when she rose, her breath was shallow. She forced herself to be calm. She pinned the shift to the line. She pretended not to notice. She kept her movement slow, as if she were alone. She gathered her empty pot, her washboard. Only then did she allow herself to look. He was no longer watching her. His back was to her, and he was attacking the woodpile. The axe rose and fell, the force of the blows sending chips flying into the snow. It was a violence, a sudden, furious energy that had not been there a minute before. Clara hurried inside, her heart hammering a strange, new rhythm. She bolted the door behind her, leaning against it, her eyes closed. She was not cold. For the first time in 2 years, she was not cold at all. That night, the dynamic in the cabin shifted. She had let him in. It was too cold to stay in the barn. The temperature had dropped to something she couldn't even name. She had pointed to the spot by the stove, on the floor, and he had taken it without a word. She was at her small table, kneading bread. He was on the floor, cleaning his boots. The bottle of whiskey he'd bought in town sat beside his pack. He had not touched it. "The snow. It's deep," she said, just to break the silence. "It's deep," he agreed. She slid the bread into the small oven on the stove, the cabin filled with the warm, yeasty smell. "I had a calf," she said, her voice quiet. "In the storm of '79, before it wandered off. I looked for it for 2 days. He stopped cleaning. He looked at the floor. "Did you find it?" "Yes, in a drift, frozen solid. It looked like it was sleeping." Elias nodded, his face grim. "I lost a good mare once, near the Sweetwater. We were crossing a ridge, and the snow just gave way. She stepped in a drift, broke her leg. I had to. He didn't need to finish. She knew. They were quiet again, but it was a different silence. It was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of lost animals. When the bread was done, she cut 2 thick slices from the heel. She put butter on both and handed him one. He took it. Their fingers did not touch, but almost. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "Clara." He nodded. "Clara." He ate the bread slowly, as if it were a miracle. He was a man who had forgotten the taste of warm bread and butter. As he was eating, he looked at her, his eyes unreadable in the lamplight. "This wood you're burning," he said, his voice a low gravel. "It's harder than a preacher's heart." She looked at him, surprised, and a sound came out of her, a sound she did not recognize. It was a laugh. It was small and rusty, like a hinge that hadn't been oiled, but it was a laugh. His eyes widened, just a fraction. He had been surprised by the sound. 2. The moment stretched, became awkward. She looked down at her hands. He went back to his boots, but the air in the cabin was lighter. The thaw was interrupted by a fist on the door. It was 3 days later. A man on a tired-looking mule. He was tall and thin, dressed in a black coat that was too large for him. his face pinched and blue from the cold. He introduced himself as Brother Silas, a traveling preacher. Clara was immediately on guard. She did not like preachers. "The Lord's mercy on this house, sister," he said, his eyes darting around the small cabin, taking in the mending, the stove, the cot. "And on you, sir," she said, not opening the door any wider. "I am on my way to Helena, but the storm has delayed my righteous journey. I seek only a little shelter, a moment of warmth by a Christian fire." Before she could answer, his eyes fixed on something behind her. Elias. Elias had risen from the floor. He stood in the shadows, his face closed, his hands loose at his sides. He was the scarred drifter again. Brother Silas's smile tightened. He looked from the rough man to the widow. His eyes, small and bright, were adding, "You have a protector, I see," Brother Silas said, his voice slick. "He's a hired hand," Clara said, the lie coming easily. "He helps with the wood." The preacher looked at Elias, his gaze sharp and probing. "You are a long way from any home. Friend, what is your origin? What family claims you?" Elias's voice was flat. "I'm a wanderer, just looking for honest work." "Ah," the preacher said, as if this confirmed something. "A wanderer. The Lord's work is everywhere. My son, even in the wilderness. He finds us. My work is with my hands." Elias said. It was a clear dismissal. Brother Silas turned back to Clara, his smile gone. "The Lord sees all, Mrs. Markham, all our arrangements. He is a jealous God." Clara's hand tightened on the door. "I can give you a piece of bread and some coffee for the road, sir, but I have no time for sermons." She gave him the food. He ate it on the porch, his eyes on her, on the cabin, on the barn. He was memorizing. He was a man who traded in gossip as much as scripture. When he left, a dirty stain remained on the snow. The visit left them both raw, exposed. The world they had held at bay had just knocked on the door. That night, Elias was drinking. He was not drunk, but he was nursing the bottle, his back against the wall, his gaze fixed on the fire in the stove. Clara sat in her chair, the silence thick with unspoken things. The preacher's words, "Our arrangements," hung in the air. "He thinks I'm a whore," she said, her voice shaking with a cold, quiet rage. "Just like the rest of them." "He's a man," Elias said. "He thinks what he's told to think." "They don't know," she whispered, her hands twisting in her lap. "They don't know what it was like. They don't know anything." She felt a sudden, terrible wave of despair. The preacher, the town, the cold, the judgment. It was endless. "Sometimes," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them, "I dream of walking into the snow. Just walking. Out onto the prairie, where it's all white and quiet. Walking until my legs get heavy and I can lie down." She looked at him, her eyes wide and dark. Just to not be cold anymore. To just be nothing. She had never said it aloud. It was her darkest secret. Her one, true sin. Elias was perfectly still, the bottle in his hand. He stared at her, and she saw something in his face. Not pity, not judgment, recognition. He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. He took a drink, a small one. He corked the bottle. "I know that feeling," he said, his voice rougher than she had ever heard it. "I've been chasing it." She waited. "I had a brother," he said, his eyes on the floor. "Younger, Sammy. He wasn't like me. He was soft. He liked books. He thought I was something. Thought I was a hero." He paused, his jaw working. "We were in Texas, a saloon in a nothing town. We were playing cards. I was drunk. We were both drunk. I got into it with a man, a loudmouth. He accused me of cheating." His hands curled into fists. "I don't remember what was said. I just remember the anger. It was hot and red, and I wanted to kill him. I pulled my knife." He stopped, his breathing ragged. "Sammy," he whispered. He tried to stop it. He always tried to stop me. He stepped between us. He put his hand on my chest and said my name. Elias, no. And I didn't see him. I just swung. Clara put a hand over her mouth. The man ran, but Sammy, he just looked at me. He had this surprised look. He fell. He died right there, in the sawdust, looking at me. Elias's voice broke. I killed him. Clara, my own blood. He looked up at her, his face a ruin of guilt and agony. So I ran. I ran from the law. I ran from that saloon. I've been running ever since. The guilt, it's a hot iron. It never cools. So don't you tell me about walking into the snow. I've been walking toward it my whole life. The confession hung in the cabin. Terrible and absolute. For a full day, they did not speak. The chasm that had briefly closed between them was now wider than ever. Elias was a caged animal. He had shown her the worst part of himself, and he was coiled tight with shame. He was all silence. He worked, his movements sharp, angry. He wouldn't look at her. He was retreating, packing his few things, getting ready to leave. She could feel it. He was leaving her, just like everyone else. That evening, the anger in her, the cold, lonely anger she had held for 2 years, finally boiled over. He was at the door, pulling on his jacket, ready to go to the barn. So that's it? She said. Her voice was tight, sharp as a needle. He stopped, his hand on the latch. What's it? You tell me a thing like that, a thing that awful. And now you can't even look at me. You're just a ghost again. You're just gonna walk away. It's better this way, ma'am. Stop calling me ma'am, she snapped, standing up, her hands fisted at her sides. You sit in my cabin, you eat my bread, you tell me you're a killer. And now you're just going to walk away? You're just like him. He spun on her, his face dark with a sudden, terrifying rage. I am nothing like him, he exploded, his voice a low growl. You're leaving, she said, tears of fury stinging her eyes. You're leaving me alone. What do you want from me? He roared, taking a step toward her. His control was gone. You want me to stay. Why? So you can… What? Fix me? I'm poison. Clara. Everything I touch, I break. I am a curse. He was shouting now, the words he'd held back for years pouring out of him. His guilt and shame a hot, stinking torrent. I told you what I am. I killed my own brother. I should have let you leave me on that porch. It would have been a kindness. I am no good to you. I am no good to anyone. I am a… He was too close, his face contorted, his eyes wild. He was a man at the end of his rope. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She just reacted. She slapped him. The sound was sharp, loud as a gunshot in the small cabin. It shocked them both into silence. His head snapped to the side. The rage, it didn't just drain. It vanished, like a candle snuffed out. He was left hollow. He slowly, very slowly, turned his head back to look at her. He touched his cheek, where her handprint was already rising. He just stared. His breath was coming in ragged, breathless gasps. I'm sorry, he whispered. It was the voice of a broken man. I'm sorry. He fumbled with the latch, his hands shaking, and stumbled out the door, into the black, cold night. Clara sank onto her stool, her entire body trembling. She had not slapped a man since she was a child. She had not seen such emptiness in a man's eyes. She had pushed him, and he had broken, and he had left. The night deepened, and a new storm came. Not snow, thunder. A deep, rolling thunder, the kind that shook the very bones of the earth. A cold, winter thunder, unnatural and terrifying. The cabin walls felt paper-thin. The sky was being torn apart. She sat in the dark, listening to the thunder and the sound of her own heart. He was gone. He was in the barn, or maybe he was walking out into the prairie. She couldn't bear it. She stood up. She went to the door. She unbarred it and pulled it open. The wind was cold, but the air was electric. He was there. He wasn't on the porch. He was standing a few feet away. In the mud and the dark, he wasn't moving. He was just standing, trembling. The sky flashed, a brilliant, cold sheet of white, and she saw him. He was not trembling from the cold. He was terrified. Every time the thunder cracked, his body flinched, a violent full-body shudder. The war, she realized, the scars, the fights, the thunder. It was all the same to him. He was looking at her, his face stripped bare of every defense. He was not a killer. He was not a drifter. He was just a man, shaking in the dark, afraid of the sky. She did not move. She just opened the door wider. The thunder rolled again, low and long. She said it. Her voice was a whisper, but it cut through the wind. The words she had never said to her husband, the pleas she had never made. "Please," she said. "Please don't leave me like he did." He looked at her. His face was wet, from the rain or from tears. She couldn't tell. He took one step, then another. The thunder cracked, loud, right over their heads. He flinched, but he did not stop. He stepped inside. He crossed the threshold, bringing the smell of rain and ozone with him. He was in, the thunder was gone, but the snow had come. It did not fall. It was a white, silent wall that had been lowered from the sky, erasing the world. The wind did not howl. It pressed, a constant, heavy hand against the small cabin. Elias had barred the door, not just with a wooden latch, but with a piece of furniture, a small stool, shoved under the handle. The world beyond the single enfrosted window was gone. There was no prairie, no town, no barn. There was only the white and the sound of the wind and the four walls of the cabin. They were trapped. The first day was a day of silence, thick and heavy. Elias sat on the floor, his back to the wall, his knees drawn up. He fed the stove. That was his job. He would rise, take a log from the stack he had built, open the iron door, and place the wood on the embers. The flare of light would illuminate the jagged scar on his cheek, the deep hollows of his eyes. Then he would sit down again. Clara sat in her chair, mending. She mended a shirt that was already mended. She worked at a patch, her stitches small and tight, her head bent. The only sounds were the scrape of the needle, the crackle of the fire, the steady, heavy pressure of the wind, and their breathing. It was the loudest sound in the room. She could hear his low and rough. He could hear hers, shallow, quick. They were two animals in a cave, waiting out the winter, wary of each other. On the second day, the hunger made them speak. "There is stew," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "I can," he offered, gesturing to the pot. He heated it. He ladled it into 2 bowls. She gave him bread. When he handed her the bowl, their fingers brushed. It was a jolt, sharp and hot, like the stove. She pulled her hand back, spilling a drop of soup. He pretended not to notice. Their eyes met. His, that strange gray hazel, held hers. He was not looking at her with pity, or with the shame of the night before. He was just looking, seeing her, the loneliness, the fear, the anger she held in her small frame. She looked away first, her throat tight. The heat in the cabin was building. It was not just the stove. It was the unsaid things. It was the smallness of the room. He was a large man. He took up space. He smelled of wood smoke and wool and a faint, clean scent of the lye soap he had used. She was aware of him, of every shift of his weight, every time he cleared his throat. On the third day, the silence was no longer empty. It was full. Elias was restless. He was a man made for the outside, and the walls were pressing in on him as much as the snow. He stood, paced the 2 steps from the door to the stove, and sat down again. He checked his guns. He cleaned his knife. He ran his hands through his hair. He stopped near the sea chest at the foot of her cot, the one she had pulled Markham's coat from. A small drawer near the bottom was crooked, stuck on something. He was a fixer. He saw the broken line. He knelt, his big scarred hands moving toward it to set it right. "Don't," she said, too quickly. He froze, his hand hovering. She sighed, the sound of defeat. It stuck. It's always stuck. He did not listen. He gently, patiently, worked the drawer. He eased it open. A small, tarnished object rolled forward and fell onto the floorboards with a soft, metallic clink. A locket. He picked it up. It was silver, or perhaps just tin, worn smooth by years of handling. He held it in his calloused palm, a fragile, feminine thing in his rough hand. Clara said nothing. She watched him. He should have set it down. He should have given it back, but he didn't. He thumbed the clasp. It sprung open. He did not look at her. He looked at the locket. Inside, on one side, was a small, faded sketch. A man's face. Younger, smoother, but unmistakably the face of the man who had been hanged. Markham. But Elias's gaze was fixed on the other side. There was no portrait, only a name, scratched faintly into the metal, as if by a nail. Emmy. He was silent for a long time. The wind moaned, pressing at the chimney. Emmy, he said. His voice was not a question. It was a statement. He had found the last, buried piece. Clara's hands, the ones mending the shirt, were still. She looked down at them, at the needle poised in the cloth. She was my daughter, she whispered. The was hung in the air, cold as the snow. Elias closed the locket. The snap was loud. He did not look at her. Not yet. He was giving her the time to build her walls back up. Markham's family, she began, the words pulling from her like teeth. They lived in Wyoming, near Cheyenne. They were righteous people. They never liked me. They thought I was common. She swallowed. The story she had held in for 2 years forcing its way up. When he was killed, they came. His mother and his brother. They came on the stage. They said he died of shame, and that I had brought it on him. She could feel his eyes on her now, but she kept her gaze on her useless hands. They said I was unfit. A widow in a town like this, with no money, living near the saloon. They said I was a fallen woman. The pastor, Gideon, he agreed with them. He said a child needed a stable, God-fearing home. Her voice was breaking, but she forced it to be steady. They took her. They had papers. From a judge in Cheyenne. It was all legal. They said I was not fit to raise her. They took my baby. She finally looked up at him. Her eyes were dry, but they were a terrible, hollow black. She was 3 years old. She cried for me. I haven't seen her in 2 years. Elias, I don't even know if I don't know. The dream of walking into the snow. It was not a dream of rest. It was a dream of going where her daughter was. Elias stood up. He walked to the window, scraping a small patch of ice from the glass with his thumbnail. He looked out at the nothing. He was a man of violence, a man who had killed his own brother. He understood guilt. He understood running. But this was a different kind of crime. This was cold. This was law. This was an injustice he could not fix with a knife. He turned back to her. His face was set, the scars standing out. He was not the broken man who had trembled in the thunder. He was someone else. We can find her, he said. It was not an offer. It was a vow. And that broke her. The simple, impossible word. She did not cry out. She made no sound at all. Her body simply collapsed. The grief she had held back. The grief for her child, which was so much greater than the grief for her husband, it just broke her. She bent in the chair, her head falling to her knees, and her shoulders began to shake in a silent, agonizing storm. Elias was across the room in one step. He did not know what to do. His hands, which had taken a life, which had fixed fences, which had held a locket, he did not know how to make them gentle. He knelt in front of her. He put one large, calloused hand on her back, between her shaking shoulder blades. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. She flinched, but she did not pull away. The touch was an anchor. He did not pat her. He did not rub her back. He just held her. He just kept his hand there, a point of solid, warm pressure, letting her know she was not alone in the room. He let her shatter. He held her, knelt on the floor, as she cried for the first time. He held her as the light in the cabin faded, as the stove began to cool. as the storm raged on, and the woman who had been a ghost of iron finally came apart in his hands. He held her gently. When the sobs finally quieted, she was exhausted. She was a wet cloth, emptied. He was still kneeling, his own knees aching, his hands still on her back. "Come," he said, his voice low. He helped her up. She was shaking, her legs unsteady. He led her the one step to the cot, her cot. "Lie down," he said. I'm cold," she whispered, her teeth chattering. It was the shock. He looked at the cot. He looked at the floor. He looked at the stove. He pulled the blankets back. She lay down, still in her dress. He pulled the blankets over her, tucking them in. She was still shivering. He took his own blanket, the one from his pack, and spread it on top. She was still shivering. He hesitated. He looked at her, a small, curled shape in the dim light. He thought of her walking into the snow. He made a decision. He did not ask. He simply sat on the edge of the cot. He took off his boots, letting them fall to the floor with a soft thud. He kept his pants on, his shirt, his heavy wool socks. He lay down on the cot, beside her, but on top of all the blankets, he was a barrier, a weight, a wall of warmth between her and the cold room. Clara went utterly still. He was not touching her, not skin to skin, but he was there. She could feel the heat of his body through the wool. She could smell the smoke on his clothes. He was heavy and solid, and he was not leaving. He lay on his back, his hands folded on his chest, staring at the ceiling. She lay on her side, facing him, her eyes wide in the dark. They did not speak. The cabin was a tomb. The only sound was the fire, which Elias had fed before, and the wind, and then their breathing. She took a breath. He took a breath. She let hers out. He let his out, slowly, without meaning to, without wanting to. Their bodies found a rhythm, the rhythm of the man who had confessed to murder and the woman who had confessed to loss. In the dark, in the cold, trapped by the snow, their breathing synced, in, out, in, out. It was the most intimate and the most chaste moment of her life. She stopped shivering, and, for the first time in 2 years, she slept without dreaming of Markham. She awoke to darkness. The fire was low, just a bed of red embers. The wind had not stopped. He was still there. He had not moved. He was not asleep. She knew it. He was guarding her. She lay there, looking at the shape of him in the dim red light from the stove. This man, this stranger. He had seen the absolute worst of her. He had seen her coldness, her rage. He had heard her shame, her secret sin of despair, and her deepest, most guarded grief. And he had not run. He had not judged. He had said, "We." She felt a movement, a strange, slow pull inside her. It was not desire. It was need, a desperate human need to give something back, to show him that he was not just a curse. Her hand, the one not trapped under the blankets, was free. It was shaking. She lifted it. She reached out in the dark. Her fingers brushed the rough wool of his shirt. He did not move. He was stone. She moved her hand up, slowly, over his chest, his shoulder, to his face. She touched the scar by his eye, the one that pulled his face into a permanent squint. She traced it, from his eyebrow down to his cheekbone. Her finger was light as a moth. He flinched. A deep, violent tremor went through his entire body. His eyes, which had been closed, snapped open. He was looking right at her. He did not speak. He just trembled. This was the touch he knew, the touch that preceded pain. "Clara," he whispered, and his voice was a ragged plea. "Don't." She did not pull her hand away. "Why not?" she whispered back. I'm poison. I told you, I break things." "You haven't broken me." He closed his eyes, a pained look on his face. "Are you sure?" he rasped. Are you sure?" He was not asking if she was sure she wanted this. He was asking if she was sure she wanted him. The killer, the drifter, the shame. He was giving her the out. He was giving her the power he had never had. She looked at him. She saw the man who had killed his brother. She saw the man who had shivered in the thunder. She saw the man who had gently held her while she wept for her child. She said nothing. She moved her hand from his face to the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his rough hair, and gently, with all the strength she had, she pulled him down. Their first kiss was not a kiss of fire. It was a kiss of salt and snow and wood smoke. It was clumsy. It was desperate. It was the press of two lonely mouths, confirming the other was real. He pulled back, breathing hard. "Clara!" She silenced him by pulling him down again. This was her choice. He was terrified. She could feel the tremor in his arms. He was afraid of his own strength, afraid of the roughness he had inherited from his past. He moved like a man handling a new, fragile bomb. He kissed her forehead, her eyelids, the corner of her mouth. He was reverent. "The cot is too small," she whispered, her voice thick. He stood, pulling the blankets with him, and lifted her. He carried her the 2 steps to the space by the stove, where the rag rug was, where the floor was warmest. He laid her down on the pallet of blankets. He lay beside her, propped on one elbow, just looking at her in the dim red glow of the embers. "I haven't," she started, her voice catching. Markham, he was not—" "I'm not him," Elias said, his voice flat with truth. "I will not hurt you." He began, slowly, to undress her, the buttons of her plain, gray dress, his fingers, scarred and busted, fumbled with the small, pearl buttons. They were shaking. She did not help him. She let him. "I'm afraid," she whispered, as he pushed the dress from her shoulders. "Of me. Of this. Of feeling anything. The town. Pastor Gideon. They look at me and they see a sin. They see a whore." He stopped, his hand on the fabric of her shift. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her shoulder. "Then let them look," he whispered against her skin. "They don't know you. They don't know a thing." He undressed her slowly, reverently, as if she were a holy thing, a woman he had no right to touch. And as he uncovered her skin, she whispered her fears. She told him about the coldness of her marriage bed. She told him about the shame of being looked at, of being judged. She told him about the hollowness, the feeling of being a ghost in her own home. He did not speak. He just listened. He listened with his hands, with his mouth. When she was bare, he did not stare. He covered her with his own body, his own heat. He was still wearing his trousers, his shirt. He was a barrier. And then, with a gentleness that shattered her, he showed her what it was to be touched by a man who was not taking, but giving. It was not lust. It was need. It was her need to be held, to be wanted, to be seen as something other than a widow. It was his need to be gentle, to prove he could hold something without breaking it, to be something other than a killer. It was slow. It was emotional. It was the only honest thing that had happened in that cabin in 2 years. Afterward, when the world had settled, when the wind was the only sound again, he held her. He was still half-dressed, his skin warm against hers, his arm heavy across her stomach, and Clara began to sob. It was not the violent grief of before. It was a release, a quiet, deep, melting sob that came from the bottom of her soul. She was not crying from regret. She was crying because she had, for a single, stolen hour, not been alone. She was crying for the years of cold, lonely shame that had just been washed away. Elias's arm tightened around her. He said nothing. He did not tell her to be quiet. He did not tell her it was all right. He just held her. He held her like she might vanish with the dawn. He held her like she was the last good thing in a world of ice and snow. And he was not letting go. The first sound of the new world was the drip of water. After 4 days of silence and snow, a Chinook wind, warm and false, blew down from the mountains. The ice on the window wept. The snow on the roof began a steady, heavy thud as it fell in clumps to the ground. The world was thawing. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was thick, charged with the memory of the night. They dressed in silence, avoiding each other's eyes. The intimacy they had shared now felt brittle in the harsh morning light. Clara's hands shook as she made coffee. Elias stood by the door, his back to her, buttoning his shirt, the scarred landscape of his skin vanishing, piece by piece under the rough wool. He was a stranger again, and she was a widow who had spent the night with him. "The snow is melting," she said, her voice too bright, too thin. "It's melting," he agreed, his voice a low gravel. He did not turn around. He went to the barn to check on his mare, and Clara was left alone in the cabin that smelled of him, of sex, and of old wood smoke. She touched the rag rug by the stove, where they had lain. She felt a wave of shame, hot and acidic, rise in her throat, Pastor Gideon's face, the whispers of the town. She was what they said she was. Elias returned an hour later. His face was grim. He did not come inside. He stood on the porch, the meltwater dripping around him. "I'm going to town," he said. "Town?" Her heart seized. "Why?" "To see, to listen." He looked past her, toward the muddy track that led to Promise Creek. We can't stay here. Clara, not after," she whispered, finishing the thought. "I need to know what's coming. The roads will be mud, but they'll be passable in a day or two. We need to be ready, to go, for Emmy." The name, Emmy. It was the anchor. It was the reason. The excuse for what they had done. It was the future. "Be careful," she said. He left. She watched him walk away, his boots sinking deep in the slush. He was a tall man, and he looked like a target. Elias was gone for 3 hours. When he returned, he was not the same man who had left. The quiet, scarred man was gone. In his place was a hunter, his eyes sharp, his body coiled. He pushed into the cabin, not waiting for an invitation. He was carrying a sack of flour and some coffee. "What is it?" Clara said, seeing his face. "What did you hear?" "Pack," he said. "Pack whatever you can carry. What you can't live without." "Elias, you're frightening me." He threw the sack on the table. "I went to the saloon, just for a drink, to listen. The roads are opening. And a man was in there. A trapper. Just came down from the north." He stopped, his jaw working. "He was talking. News from Helena. There's a new bounty hunter in the territory, a man named Silas. Brother Silas." Clara's hand went to her mouth. "The preacher?" "He ain't no preacher," Elias said, his voice a snarl. "He's a wolf, travels, preaches, listens for gossip on men who are wanted. And he's coming here." "But what does that have to do with you?" Elias finally looked at her, and his eyes were full of the guilt he had carried from Texas. "The trapper. He had a name. The name Silas was asking about. The name that's on a paper in Helena." "What name?" "Elias Thorne, wanted for the murder of Samuel Thorne, my brother." "Oh, God," she whispered. "He's coming here. Clara." "He was on his way before the storm. He'll be here as soon as the mud settles. That preacher, he saw me. He saw me here." "With you? He put it all together. He'll come here first." "Then you have to go," she said, the words tasting like ash. She grabbed his arm. "You have to go now. Elias, take your horse. Ride north. Go before he gets here. You have to run." He looked down at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own. His hand was warm and steady. "No," he said, his voice quiet, but with a finality that chilled her. "What do you mean, no? He will kill you. He will take you, or he will shoot you. You have to run." "I've been running for 6 years," Elias said, his eyes holding hers. "I ran from my brother's body. I ran from my own name. I've been running in my sleep. Last night, in that storm, when you opened that door, I stopped." "Elias, this is not a storm. This is a man. A man with a gun and a piece of paper. And I'm done running." He said, "I'm not running from my past. I'm not running from the guilt. And Clara, I'm not running from you. But we are leaving. he said. "You and me, we are leaving to find your daughter. That's the only direction I'm going. He will follow you. He will hunt us. Let him try. But we are not waiting for him." The decision was made. It was a terrible, reckless, beautiful decision, and it lit a fire in her own cold heart. They were not two broken people hiding. They were two people with a destination. The preparations were swift and brutal. "We need a wagon," he said. "The mare. She's a good horse, but she can't carry us both, and supplies, and a child. Not for that distance." He went to the livery, not to Hatcher's, but to a small, independent stable at the far end of town. Clara waited in the cabin, her stomach a cold knot. He was selling his only freedom. He came back 3 hours later, leading a mismatched pair of mules hitched to a small, sturdy farm wagon. The wagon bed was solid. The wheels were good. "The mare?" she asked, her voice soft. "I sold her. He said he wouldn't look at her." He just ran his hand over the rough wood of the wagon. "Got the wagon, the mules, and $50. For supplies. She'll have a good home. The man. He's a good man." Clara knew what that horse had meant. It was his legs, his escape. He had sold the last piece of the man he was. "Now you," he said, turning to her. "What are we taking?" She looked around the cabin. It was a tomb. It was her prison. It was her home. It was filled with ghosts. She took the locket. She took the small, hidden bundle of Emmy's baby clothes. She took her mending kit. She took a pot, a skillet, her good knife. She took the bag of flour, the coffee. Then she went to the sea chest. She opened it, the smell of cedar. She looked at her mother's lace. She left it. She looked at Markham's old papers, his deeds to the land that was never his, the banknotes. She took them, and at the bottom, the heavy wool coat, her husband's coat, the one Elias had worn. She took the coat and the papers, and she walked to the stove. Elias was outside, hitching the mules, loading the few things. He did not see. She opened the stove door. The fire was hot. She fed the papers in. One by one, the deed, the notes, the name, Markham, curling into black ash, disappearing. Then she held the coat. She held it to her face. It smelled of wool and dust, and faintly of Elias. She thought of her husband's last words. "I'll come back for you." He had not. He had left her. He had left her to the whispers, to the judgment, to the cold. Elias had not. He was staying. He was here. She pushed the heavy wool coat into the fire. It took a moment to catch, but when it did, the flames roared. A hot orange. Goodbye. She closed the stove, her face grim. She was no longer the widow Markham. She was just Clara. She walked out of the cabin and did not look back. "I'm ready," she said. Elias helped her up onto the wagon bench. It was high and hard. He handed her a small bundle, his pack. He had put his own blanket and his tin cup inside. He climbed up beside her. He held the reins. He looked at the cabin. She looked at the road. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. The mules strained. The wheels bit into the mud, and the wagon lurched forward. They were leaving. They did not get far. They had to pass the edge of town. They had to pass the saloon, which was already spilling light and noise into the gray, muddy afternoon. They were on the main track, just past the last building, when a voice cut through the air. Well, looky here." A toll, a drunk farmer from a claim north of town. A man named Taggart, the brother of one of the men who had lynched Markham. He was standing in the mud, a bottle in his hand, his face red and blotchy. Elias did not stop. He kept the mules at a steady walk. "Where you going, widow?" Taggart shouted, stepping in front of the wagon, forcing Elias to pull the mules to a halt. "Get out of the way, Taggart," Elias said, his voice a low, lethal warning. Taggart's eyes, small and piggish, traveled over Clara. They lingered on her, stripping her bare. He smiled. A wet, ugly thing. "Heard you was keeping warm this winter. Clara," he sneered. his voice loud enough for the men on the saloon porch to hear. "Heard the storm wasn't all you had trapped in that cabin." Clara's face went white. She stared straight ahead. "I said," Elias repeated. "Get out of the way." Taggart took a swig from his bottle. "It ain't decent. Her husband not even cold for 2 years, and she spreads her legs for the first scarred drifter who— Oomph!" It was not a fight. It was a single, economical movement. Elias did not get down from the wagon. He did not put down the reins. He simply shifted his weight, and with a speed that was terrifying, his right fist, scarred and hard, connected with Taggart's jaw. The sound was a wet, heavy crack. Taggart didn't fall. He was knocked cold, flying backward 3 feet, his body landing with a heavy splash in the thickest part of the mud. He did not move. The saloon porch went silent. Elias did not look at them. He just shook his hand. Once, his knuckles already splitting, he picked up the reins. "Move," a voice said. Sheriff Brody. He was standing on the boardwalk, his hand not on his gun, but near it. He was a tired man, a man who preferred paper to violence. He was in the road. Elias said. "He's a drunk and an idiot," Brody said, his eyes on the man in the mud, then on Elias. "But he's got family, and you just made a bad enemy. Friend. We're leaving," Elias said. "I see that." Brody looked at Clara. His eyes were not unkind, just weary. "I heard that Silas was in town. The preacher." "We heard," Elias said. "He was asking questions. About you, about the widow, about Texas." Brody sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't like bounty men. They're just trouble. But I'm the law, and if he comes back with a valid paper, I'll have to honor it." "He won't find us," Elias said. "See that he doesn't." The sheriff looked at the man in the mud, who was beginning to groan. "You should have just gone around him, son. Now you're a man who hits, not just a drifter. It's a small difference, but it matters." He nodded. A final, tired dismissal. "Go on, get—" Elias snapped the reins. "Yeah." The wagon lurched forward, pulling past the saloon, past the last house. They were on the open prairie. The mud was deep. The sun was a weak, watery smear in the west. They did not speak for miles. The only sound was the suck and pull of the wheels in the mud, the jingle of the harness, and the soft, pained thunk of Taggart's head hitting the boardwalk as his friends, finally, dragged him out of the street. That night, they were truly alone. They made camp in a small hollow, sheltered by a stand of naked cottonwoods. The ground was cold and wet. Elias built a small, smokeless fire, a skill he had learned from a hard life. Clara cooked salt pork and beans. They ate from the single pot, sharing a spoon. It was a grim, silent meal. The confrontation had soured the air, made their escape feel less like a choice and more like a rout. "He broke his jaw," Elias said, staring into the small fire. "He deserved it," Clara said, her voice fierce. "That's not the point. The sheriff was right. I was loud. I was stupid. I put you in more danger. Taggart's brothers. They'll remember." "We're not going back," she said. "No." He poked the fire with a stick. "We're not." The air was cold. The mud was seeping through their blankets. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, the small, intimate world of the cabin shattered. He was a wanted man. She was the whore he'd defended. The silence grew, became cold and heavy. I should have just stayed," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have let you go. I've doomed you, Elias, that preacher. He'll hunt you. He'll find you. And it will be my fault." He looked up. His eyes, in the firelight, were dark. "I fought in the war, Clara," he said, his voice low, changing the subject so fast it gave her vertigo. The war? The one between the states. I was young, stupid. I thought it was an adventure." He smiled, a bitter, mirthless twist of his scarred mouth. "I was on the side that lost." He looked into the flames. "I saw men, good men, die. For nothing. For a piece of paper. For a lie. Someone in a tent, miles away. It would say a hill was important, and we would go up it, and we would die, and the next day, they would say another hill. It was all lies. He looked at her, his gaze intense, painful. That's where I learned it. How to kill, how to be empty, how to not feel. He leaned forward, the firelight catching the white in his scars. I've been afraid of a lot of things. I was afraid of the thunder. I was afraid of touching you in the cabin. I was afraid I would break you. He shook his head, a deep, shuddering motion. But I'm not afraid of Silas. He's just a man. He's just another lie. He looked at her, his eyes raw. The only thing I'm afraid of, Clara, is that my love, this thing I feel, will destroy you. That I'm just another kind of lie. That I'll pull you down with me. She looked at this man, this killer, this soldier, this gentle, broken man who had sold his horse for her. You think you're the one who is broken? She said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. She moved, crawling around the small fire, through the mud, until she was kneeling in front of him. I'm the one who's broken. Elias, don't you see? She grabbed the front of his shirt. That town, that man, my husband, they broke me into 1,000 pieces. I was just dust. I was a ghost. I was walking into the snow. She looked up at him, her eyes burning. What matters, she said, her voice shaking, is not who's broken. It's who stays after the pieces fall. It's who sits in the dark and helps you pick them up. She put her cold, muddy hand against his scarred cheek. You stayed. He let out a breath, a sound that was half a sob, half a groan. He pulled her into his arms, and it was not gentle. It was desperate. He kissed her, and it was not the slow, reverent kiss from the cabin. This was a kiss of fire, and mud, and fear. It was a kiss that said, this is our last chance. It was a kiss that said, I will not let you go. He pulled her down onto the rough blankets, in the mud, by the dying fire. He did not undress her. He did not undress himself. He pushed her skirts up. He unbuttoned his trousers, and he took her. It was not love-making. It was a claiming. It was a desperate, fiery coupling, a clinging of two bodies against the cold, against the law, against the past. It was a promise. It was a sin. It was a prayer. It was, I am here. It was, you are mine. Afterward, they lay tangled, breathing hard, the cold seeping back in. He pulled their blankets over them, holding her tight against his chest, as if she could be absorbed into his skin. He held her all night, as the moon rose, cold and high. Clara slept, and she dreamed. She was in the snow, the endless white prairie. She was walking. Her feet were cold, and she heard it. Mama? A small voice, a child's voice. Mama, where are you? She turned, in the dream, but there was no one. Just the white, just the cold. Emmy, she cried out. Emmy, I'm here. Mama, I'm cold. She woke up with a gasp, tears streaming down her face, her heart a cold stone in her chest. Emmy, she whispered. Her voice choked. She was in the wagon, under the stars. The fire was dead. Elias was beside her, his arm a heavy, warm bar across her. He was awake. He had been awake. He did not speak. He did not ask what was wrong. He knew. He just moved. He propped himself up on one elbow, his body shielding her from the cold night air. He leaned over her, and gently, with a tenderness that was more intimate than their desperate passion, he kissed the tears from her eyelids. One, then the other. He kissed the salt. He kissed the grief. I know, he whispered, his voice a rough comfort in the dark. I know. We'll find her. He pulled her head onto his chest, his rough, wool-clad chest, and held her. She listened to the steady, slow beat of his heart, the heart of a killer, the heart of a soldier, the heart of the only man who had ever stayed. She closed her eyes, and for the rest of the night, she did not dream. The journey into Wyoming was a crossing into a different world, The black mud of the Montana valleys gave way to high, wind-scoured plains, the grass cured to a pale, brittle gold. They traveled for weeks, following the thin, cold line of the North Platte River. They became, on the road, a new kind of creature. They were Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. The name Elias had given was a shield, a simple lie that held them together. In the small towns where they stopped for flour and salt, no one looked twice. They were just another pair of homesteaders, their face grim from the trail, their wagon stocked with the barest of necessities. Clara drove the mules as much as he did. Her hands, which had been raw from needlework, were now raw from rope and leather. She learned to handle the long reins, to call to the mules in a low, steady voice. Elias sat beside her, his rifle always across his knees, his eyes not on the road, but on the horizon, the ridges, the arroyos. He was a sentinel, watching for the ghost of a man named Silas, the man who called himself a preacher. Their intimacy was quiet and born of necessity. They slept under the wagon, wrapped in their separate blankets, but close. Sometimes, in the deep, cold dark, a hand would find another, a press of fingers, a wordless, "Are you there? I am here." The ranch was not a ranch. It was a business. It sat in a bleak, wind-swept valley, a collection of gray, unpainted buildings surrounded by a stark white fence, a sign, its letters already peeling. Read, "Willow Creek Foundling Home, a Christian future for God's lost lambs." Clara's stomach tightened. "This looks cold. It's a place, that's all," Elias said. He pulled the wagon to a halt at the main house. "Let me do the talking. We're just looking for work, a roof, anything." A woman met them on the porch. She was thin, her hair pulled back so tight it made her eyes small. She wore a black dress with a high, starched collar. She was a Mrs. Gable. "Work?" Her voice was like a dry hinge. "We have no need for drifters. We run a clean, godly place." "My wife and I, ma'am," Elias said, his voice respectful, his hat in his hands. He was playing the part. "We're handy. I can fix anything. Pumps, fences. My wife, she's a good cook, a mender." "Mrs." Gable's eyes flickered over Clara. She saw the rough dress, the worn hands. She saw a worker. "The pump on the north well is broken," she said, "and the kitchen help just ran off with a cattle driver. You can have the shed by the chicken coop. $1 a week, for you both, and you'll eat with the staff. We abide by rules here." "Mr. Thorne," Elias said, "and Mrs. Thorne. Thank you, ma'am. We won't be a bit of trouble." They were in. The shed was a single, cold room, but it had a roof. They worked. For 3 days. They worked. Elias, true to his word, took apart the broken well pump. Clara was put in the vast, steaming kitchen, peeling potatoes, scrubbing pots, her eyes and ears open. The children were quiet. They were dressed in gray uniforms. They moved in lines. They did not laugh. Clara's heart ached. She searched every small face, looking for her own, for Markham's blonde hair. She saw no one. On the 4th night, Clara was in the kitchen, long after supper, finishing the pots. Mrs. Gable was in her office, working on her ledgers. Elias, finished with the pump, was fixing a loose board on the office porch. He was just outside the window. Clara dried her hands and walked to the office. "Ma'am, Mrs. Gable?" The woman looked up, annoyed. "What is it, Mrs. Thorne?" I heard, my sister, ma'am." Clara lied, the words thick in her throat. "She had to give up her child, a little girl, 2 years ago. She said she thought she might have come here. I just wanted to ask, Mrs. Gable's face hardened. "We do not discuss the children. Their pasts are washed clean when they arrive." "I know, ma'am. Her name was Emmy Markham." Mrs. Gable's pen stopped. She did not look up. "Markham. Yeah, I remember. A difficult case. The child of a hanged man. From Montana." Clara's breath stopped. "Is she here?" "No." Mrs. Gable said, turning a page in her ledger. She is not, but she was. She was here, for a time. Mrs. Gable looked up, her eyes cold as stones. A very fine, childless couple from Cheyenne heard of her. A Mr. and Mrs. Parsons. They were moved by her tragic story. They came to us. Parsons, Clara whispered. They have a large homestead in the mountains. They felt they could provide her a better, more secluded life. They were very generous. They made a substantial donation to our work, to help other lost lambs. Clara's blood ran cold. A donation? A legal adoption. Mrs. Thorne. All papers signed. She is their daughter now. Sold. The word screamed in Clara's head. She sold my baby. Where? Where in the mountains? Mrs. Gable's face snapped up. Her suspicion, which was always just under the surface, was now in her eyes. Why, you are very curious, Mrs. Thorne, for a sister. She just wanted to know. Clara stammered, backing away. I'll finish the pots. She fled. She ran to the shed, her hands over her mouth, a silent, terrible sob shaking her. Elias found her there. A minute later, his face was a mask of thunder. Parsons, he said. Cheyenne, that's all I heard. She sold her, Clara whispered, her voice breaking. She sold Emmy, Elias. The rage in him, the thing he had kept chained, the beast that had killed his brother. It broke. He did not say a word. He turned and walked out of the shed. Elias! Clara screamed, running after him. He was not going to the wagon. He was walking to the main house. He found the foreman, a large, brutish man who worked for Mrs. Gable, in the barn, graining the horses. You, Elias said, his voice not human. The man turned. What do you want? Elias grabbed the man by the front of his shirt, lifting him, slamming him against the wall of the stall. The wood cracked. Parsons. Elias snarled. The ones who took the girl. Emmy. Where? I don't know nothing. The man gasped, his eyes wide with terror. You're a liar. Elias's hand, the one that had held Clara's, was now a claw. It gripped the man's throat. He was lifting him off the ground. She sold a child, and you know where. Tell me, or I will break you. He was choking him. The man's face was turning a deep, dark red. His boots kicking at the air. Elias, no! Clara screamed, grabbing his arm. She was nothing against his strength. Elias, stop! You're killing him! He didn't hear her. He was back in Texas, in the sawdust, the red rage in his eyes. Elias, she shrieked, clawing at his face. We need to survive. For her, not for this. Don't become him. Don't let them win. We need the information. We need him alive. Her words. For her. Finally. Finally. Cut through the red. He looked at her. He saw her face, twisted in terror. He saw what he was doing. With a roar of disgust, he dropped the man. The foreman collapsed in a heap, coughing, gasping, his throat raw. Elias stood over him, trembling, his chest heaving. The Laramie Range. The man choked, spitting. Up past Cheyenne, a homestead, High Valley, Parsons. Now get out of here. Elias grabbed Clara's hand. Let's go. They did not take their dollar. They did not say goodbye. They hitched the mules, threw their few belongings in the wagon, and drove out of that cold, gray place. The foreman's curses and misses. Gable's shouts following them into the wind. They rode into the mountains. The trail was no longer a road. It was a track. A thin, winding scar that climbed into the Laramie Range. The air grew thin and cold. The wagon wheels, which had survived the mud, now groaned over rock. They were following the name, Parsons. Elias was a hollow man. The rage had left him, and in its place was a terrible, cold shame. He had almost killed a man. Again, he had almost become his brother's killer. All over again. You should have let me, he whispered. 2 nights later, as they huddled by a fire that gave no warmth. What? Let you kill him? She said, her voice sharp. Let you go. Back in Montana. I'm a curse. Clara, I've brought you. You brought me here, she said, her voice fierce. You brought me to my daughter. We are close. I can feel it. What you did, it was for her. I see it. Elias, I'm not afraid of it. Not anymore." He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain she could not understand. "You should be," he said. The fever started the next day. It began as a shiver. He blamed the altitude. He blamed the wind. But by afternoon, he was shaking so violently the wagon bench rattled. "Elias," Clara said, her hand on his forehead. He was burning. "It's just a chill," he stammered, his teeth chattering. He collapsed. He fell from the bench into the wagon bed. A dead weight. Clara was alone. She was on a mountain, miles from any town, with 2 mules, a wagon, and a dying man. She looked at him. He was delirious, his eyes rolling. He was muttering, "Sammy, Sammy, I'm sorry. The hill, too cold." "No," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "No, you are not leaving. I am not letting you." She took the reins. She drove the mules, her eyes scanning the rock, the trees, looking for something. She found it, a shadow, a shallow cave, an overhang of rock, shielded by a stand of wind-blasted pines. It was almost impossible. She had to half carry, half drag him. He was 180 pounds of limp. Burning man. She fell. She got up. She pulled. She dragged him out of the wagon, into the shallow shelter. She tethered the mules. She unloaded their blankets, their food, the last of their kindling. For 2 days, she was a warrior. She kept the fire, which was their life, alive. She went out in the biting, high-altitude wind, pulling dead branches from the pines, her hands bleeding, her face raw. She melted snow in their one pot. She found some dried herbs in her pack and made a bitter tea. She forced it, drop by drop, past his cracked, dry lips. He was in his own world. He was in the war. He was in Texas. He cried out for Sammy. He cried out for his mother. He never cried out for her. On the 3rd night, the fire was almost dead. The wood was gone. The wind was a knife. He was still. His breathing was so shallow. She could barely see his chest move. He was cold. The fever had broken, and now the cold was coming for him. She sat, her own body numb, her heart a block of ice. He was going to die. Here, in this cave. He was going to leave her. "No," she whispered. "I will not be cold. I will not be alone." She made a decision. It was not a thought. It was an instinct. She crawled under the pile of thin, filthy blankets. She lay down next to him, his body a clammy, cold thing. She pressed herself against his back, her small, thin body against his large one. She wrapped her arms around him, her face against his neck. She put her legs around his. She was giving him her life, her warmth. He was a block of ice. She held him, her own body shivering, her teeth chattering. "Please," she whispered, her breath hot on his cold skin. "Please, not him. Don't take him. Don't leave me alone again. Please, Elias, stay, stay." She whispered prayers. Not to God, to him, to the man. She did not know when she fell asleep, or if she fainted. She woke to a sound, a groan, and a hand, a heavy hand, on her. She opened her eyes. It was dawn, a gray, sick light. The fire was dead ash. Elias was looking at her. His eyes were clear. They were sunk deep in his skull, but they were clear. He was alive. She was still wrapped around him, her face in his neck, her arms gripping him like death. He was soaked in sweat. She was soaked in his sweat. "Clara," he rasped, his voice a dry croak. She just looked at him. He was weak. He could barely move. But he did. He moved his hand, the one that was on her back, and he held her. He pulled her, if possible, closer. "I'm not," he whispered, his lips brushing her frozen hair. "I'm not leaving." It took another week. A week of Clara hunting. Badly. She snared a rabbit. They ate. He sat up. He walked. He was weak, but he was Elias. He was the man who survived. They found the homestead. It was in a valley, a high, green valley, a miracle of grass and water. A small, neat cabin sat by a stream. smoke rising from the chimney. A dog barked, and a child. Clara saw her first. She grabbed Elias's arm. A little girl. Her hair was blonde, long, tied in a ribbon. She was wearing a dress, a clean, blue dress. She was throwing a stick for a barking dog. She was older. She was 5, maybe 6. She was beautiful. A woman came out of the cabin, wiping her hands on an apron. "Emmy, supper's on." The girl laughed, a sound like a small, clear bell. "Coming, Mama." Clara made a sound, a small, strangled, animal sound. She would have fallen from the wagon if Elias hadn't been holding her. "Clara, breathe!" His voice was iron. "Breathe!" She couldn't. This was the end. The woman, she was kind. Her voice was kind. The child was happy. She was calling another woman Mama. Clara was shattered. She just sat there. The world, the trees, the sky. It all went gray. "I can't," she whispered. "Elias, she's happy. Look at her. I've lost." "No," Elias said. He was not looking at the child. He was looking at Clara. "This is not a fight. This is an answer. Now, we go down. You talk. Talk? What do I say? What do I do? Do I take her? You find out," he said. "You just find out." He drove the wagon down. The woman, Mrs. Parsons. Her name was Sarah. She was not Mrs. Gable. She was young. Her face was open and kind. She saw the wagon. She saw Clara. And she knew. A shadow passed over her face. "Clara," Clara said, her voice a ghost. I'm Emmy's mother," she finally said. Sarah Parsons' hand went to her own throat. A man came out, her husband, Henry. He was a good man. You could see it. "We need to talk," Clara said. They sat in the cabin. It was warm. It smelled of baking bread. It was everything Clara had ever wanted. She told her story. The lynching, the preacher, Mrs. Gable. She did not cry. Her voice was a flat, dead thing. Sarah Parsons cried. She wept, her face in her hands. "We were told," she sobbed. "We were told her mother was gone. A fallen woman, dead. Henry Parsons, a man with a steady, quiet face, looked at Clara. He looked at Elias, who stood by the door, his hand on his gun. A silent, scarred guardian. "What do you want?" Henry asked. "I want my daughter." Clara said. "She doesn't know you," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "She was so small. She calls me. She loves. Oh, God, this will kill her. She is my child," Clara said. "And she is ours," Sarah cried, a mother's fierceness in her eyes now. "We have loved her. We have raised her. You." "I was coming," Clara said, her own voice rising. "I was always coming." "Stop," Elias said, his voice, quiet, cut through the women's pain. He looked at Henry, man to man. "This is not a thing that can be won. It's a child's heart." He was right. "She must choose," Henry said, his voice heavy. "It is the only way. It is the only fair way. But it will break her. She is stronger than you think," Clara whispered, though she was not sure she believed it. The plan was made. Elias, it was his idea. He went to Emmy, who was hiding behind Sarah's skirts, staring at the strangers. "Emmy," Elias said, his voice, which could be so rough, now impossibly gentle. "My name is Elias. This is Clara. We are old friends, and we are going for a walk, to see the stream. Would you be our guide? We're lost." The girl looked at him, at his scars. She was not afraid. She looked at Clara. "Will you come, Mama?" she asked Sarah. "No, sweet," Sarah whispered, her heart breaking. "You go. Be a guide. I'll be right here." Emmy, brave, took Elias's hand. They walked. Elias, the girl, Clara. They walked by the stream. Elias pointed out a bird. Emmy laughed. Clara was trembling. She was afraid to speak. What if her voice? "You have a pretty dress," Clara said, her voice a croak. "Mama made it," Emmy said, proud. Clara's heart, she felt it tear. She had to know. Her voice, thin and shaking. She began to sing. The song she had made up. The one she sang when Emmy was a baby. In the cabin. Before Markham. Before. Sleep, my Emmy. Stars are bright. Mama's here. It's all right. Emmy stopped. She dropped Elias's hand. She stood on the path. And she turned. She looked at Clara. Not as a stranger. She looked at her. Her head tilted. A look of profound, deep confusion. "What is that?" Emmy whispered. "It's just a song," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "The lady," Emmy said, her small hand reaching out, not touching. "The other lady, before Mama, she sang that, she smelled like bread." "Emmy," Clara whispered, sinking to her knees in the dirt. "Oh, Emmy." "Who are you?" "I'm Clara." Emmy just stared. She did not cry. She did not run. She just stared. That night, the cabin was a torture chamber. Sarah Parsons had made supper. No one ate. Emmy sat on a stool by the fire. She looked at Sarah and Henry. She looked at Clara and Elias. She was a small child, 5 years old, being asked to move a mountain. "Emmy, it's bedtime." "Sweet," Sarah said, her voice trying to be normal. Emmy stood up. She walked to her small cot in the corner. She looked at it. She looked at Sarah. Then, she turned. She walked past Sarah. She walked across the small room. She stood in front of Clara. Clara was not breathing. Emmy looked at her. For a long, long time. Then, she whispered, so low. Only Clara could hear. "Will he come?" She pointed to Elias. Clara looked at Elias. Elias nodded. "Yes," Clara said. "He will come." Emmy nodded. She turned to Sarah and Henry. Her small face was a mask of terrible, adult sadness. "I want to go with her," she said, her voice a tiny, clear bell. Sarah let out a sound, a sob that was torn from her. Emmy's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered to Sarah. "But she's my real Mama." The hardest part was leaving. Sarah Parsons, her face pale and swollen, pressed a small, cloth-wrapped bundle into Emmy's hands. "Bread for the journey," she whispered, her voice breaking. She could not look at Clara. Henry Parsons stood beside his wife, his hand on her shoulder, his face a mask of resigned grief. He shook Elias's hand. "God go with you," he said, his voice thick. Emmy was silent. She did not cry. She was a small, 5-year-old child, her entire world unmade and remade in a single night. She just watched. She watched the woman who had been her mother weep on the porch. Clara's heart tore. "Thank you," Clara whispered to Sarah, a word that felt small and cruel. Sarah only shook her head, turning away, her shoulders shaking. Elias lifted Emmy into the wagon bed, onto a pallet of their blankets. He helped Clara onto the bench. He did not look back. He snapped the reins. "Hia!" The wagon wheels groaned, pulling away from the warm cabin, away from the smell of baking bread, away from the only home Emmy had ever truly known. They rode in silence for the first hour. The only sound, the jingle of the harness and the soft, terrible, controlled sobs of Sarah Parsons, which faded behind them. Emmy sat in the back, her small face pale, her eyes wide. She did not cry. She just held the warm bundle of bread. Clara did not dare look back. They traveled west. They did not go back to Promise Creek. They cut north into the wilder territory, where the mountains were steeper and the maps gave out. They were not running from the law. Elias was done running. They were looking for a place that was not on any map, a place where a man's past could not be bought with a piece of paper, a place where a woman's reputation was not the property of gossips. The journey was a new beginning. It was slow. It was hard. Emmy was quiet for weeks. She was a small, sad shadow, and Clara's heart ached with a patience she had never known. Elias was the bridge. He was a man of quiet, simple actions. He taught Emmy how to read the clouds, how to find the North Star. He would point, his scarred fingers steady. "See that, Emmy? That's a hawk. He's hunting. He's free." Clara taught her other things. She taught her the names of the wildflowers that were brave enough to grow between the rocks. At night, by the fire, Clara would sing, not just the lullaby, but other songs, old songs from her own childhood. And Emmy would, slowly, sometimes, her voice a tiny thread, sing with her. After 3 weeks of travel, they found it, a valley. It was not a grand valley, but a small, hidden bowl, tucked between 2 high ridges, accessible only by a narrow, overgrown game trail. A stream, clear and cold, cut through the middle, and at the far end, against the rock wall, was a ruin. It was an old miner's cabin. The roof caved in, the chimney a pile of stones. "It's broken," Clara said, her voice low. Elias reined in the mules, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. He was not looking at the cabin. He was looking at the water, the grass, the single way in. He was looking at the fortress. "No," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "It's a foundation." They rebuilt their life from the rock and the timber of that small valley. It was a life built not with words, but with hands. The first task was the cabin. Elias, with a strength Clara had only seen in his rage, now used that strength to build. He felled pines, hewed them into beams, and set a new roof. He was a master of fixing broken things. While he worked on the structure, Clara worked on the heart. She and Emmy cleared the inside. They swept out the packed dirt, the nests of mice, the ghosts. They found an old iron stove, rusted but whole. They scrubbed it with sand from the creek until it was black and beautiful. And the hearth, Clara mixed clay and straw, and with her own hands. She rebuilt the chimney, one hearthstone, one careful handful of mud at a time. When it was done, she built the first fire, and the cabin, for the first time, was a home. The smell of baking bread, the smell Emmy remembered, filled the air. The second task was the fence. Elias was building a small corral for the mules. He was digging post holes. Clara watched him, his body moving with a steady, tireless rhythm. His hands, the hands that had killed Sammy, the hands that had almost killed the foreman, were now digging into the earth, planting. He was planting a life. Emmy would bring him stones, one by one, for the foundation of the new barn. He would take each one, his scarred large hand closing over her small one, and he would thank her, gravely. "Thank you, Miss Emmy. That's a good stone." The final task was the lullaby. Emmy was healing, but the scars were deep. She was a good child, but she was a ghost in her own life. She called Clara Clara. She called Elias Mr. Elias. She worked, she ate, she slept, but she did not laugh, not like she had in the parson's yard. Clara's heart ached with patience. One night, a storm, a real mountain storm, crashed into the valley. The thunder, the same thunder that had terrified Elias, echoed like cannon fire. Emmy woke with a scream. She was sitting bolt upright in her small cot, her eyes wide with terror, crying for Mama. Clara was there in an instant. She did not go to her. She went to the cot. She sat on the edge, her heart breaking. "Mama, Mama," Emmy cried, reaching out, her eyes still closed, lost in the nightmare. Sarah. She was crying for Sarah. Clara felt a pain so sharp, so cold, she almost left the room. Elias, from their own cot, watched her. His face was tense. Clara took a breath. She did not leave. She gathered the small, trembling girl into her arms. "Shh, sweet," Clara whispered. "Shh, it's just the thunder." "Mama," Emmy sobbed into her shoulder. "I know," Clara whispered, her own tears hot on Emmy's hair. "I know, Mama's here." And she began to sing. "Sleep, my Emmy, stars are bright." Her voice was thick with tears, but she sang. She held her daughter, her child, and she sang. Emmy's sobs quieted. Her small body, which had been rigid, slowly, slowly relaxed. She snuffled. She was quiet for a long time, just listening to the song in the rain. Then, her voice a small, sleepy murmur against Clara's neck, she whispered, "Mama." Clara's eyes closed. She held her child. She was, finally, home. Life settled. It was a hard life. It was a good life. It was a real life. The valley was theirs. They had a small garden. Elias had trapped, and they had furs. They had meat. They had bread. They were, for the first time, a family. One evening, in the late summer, they were sitting on the porch Elias had built. The air was cool, smelling of pine. Emmy was asleep, her breathing the soft, steady sound of their future. Elias was whittling. He was always whittling, his hands always busy. Clara was mending one of his shirts, the needle flashing in the twilight. "It's quiet," she said. "It's good," he replied. He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the scrape of his knife on the wood. He stopped. He looked at the thing in his hand. He looked at her. "Clara," he said. His voice was low and a little rough. She looked up. "I'm not a man for words," he said. He was fumbling. The man who had faced down gunmen was fumbling. "I know what I am. I know what I've done. I'm a hard man." "You're a good man, Elias," she said, her voice soft. He shook his head. "I'm your man, if you'll have me." He held out his hand. In his calloused, scarred palm was a small, wooden ring. It was carved from the dark, rich heart of a piece of oak. It was simple and smooth and perfect. "I don't have a name," he whispered. "Not one that's clean. I don't have a piece of paper. I don't have anything. But I want to be your husband. I want to be her father, in the eyes of God, or just in our eyes." Clara looked at the ring. She looked at his face, his scarred, beautiful, earnest face. He was terrified. She put down her mending. She took the ring, and her tears, which she thought were all gone, began to fall. They were not tears of grief. They were not tears of release. They were tears of pure, unbridled joy. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choking. "Yes, Elias, yes." He slid the wooden ring onto her finger. It fit. He had been carving it for weeks. He took her hand, the one with the ring, and he kissed it. He kissed her rough knuckles, and he kissed the ring, and he held her hand to his scarred cheek. One night, months later, the first snow of the new winter was falling. Not a blizzard, just a soft, quiet, gentle fall. Emmy was asleep. The cabin was warm, smelling of cedar and stew. Clara stood at the cabin door, watching the flakes drift down, silver in the moonlight. It was so peaceful. It was a peace so deep, so profound. It frightened her. She thought of Promise Creek. She thought of the whispers. She thought of Markham. She thought of Sammy. Elias came up behind her. He did not touch her. He just stood with her. He had a way of standing, a way of just being, a solid wall at her back. "It's beautiful," he said. "It is," she whispered. She was quiet for a moment. Then the question, the one that haunted her in her happiest moments, the one that kept her awake. "Elias," she said, her voice small, "do you think we deserve this? This peace?" She was the widow of a thief. He was a killer. Their life was built on a foundation of grief and running and death. "Do we have a right?" He was silent. He watched the snow with her. He thought of the war. He thought of the saloon in Texas. He thought of the cold, hard ground he had slept on for 6 years. He thought of the feel of her, wrapped around him in the cave, giving him her life. He put his hand on her shoulder. His hand was warm and heavy and real. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "We survived it. That's enough." He turned her, gently, to face him. He looked at her, his wife, the woman who had seen the absolute worst of him and had not flinched, the woman who had saved his life. "It's cold," he said. "Come to bed." That night, their love was not the desperate, healing need of the cabin. It was not the fiery, claiming passion of the muddy camp. It was something new. It was slow. It was sensual. It was a reverence. He undressed her, slowly, by the light of the fire. His hands, which now knew her body as well as they knew the grain of wood, were gentle. He kissed the places where the work of the day had left its mark, the small of her back, which ached from the garden, her hands, which were rough from the lie. She, in turn, undressed him. She was not afraid, not anymore. She traced the long, puckered scar on his back. It was not a map of his violence. It was a map of his survival. She kissed the scar on his shoulder. She kissed the scar on his cheek. She was kissing the truth of him. They came together in their bed, a bed they had built, under a roof they had raised. It was a passion born not of desperation, but of choice. It was a comfort, the comfort of knowing, absolutely, that the person holding you would not be gone in the morning. It was a truth told not in words, but in the slow, sacred, silent language of their bodies. They were two broken, scarred, damned people, and in each other's arms, they were, finally, completely, and absolutely whole. Clara awoke to a warmth. The sun was streaming in the small window, lighting up the dust motes like diamonds. Elias was awake, lying on his back, his arm under her head, but the warmth, the extra warmth, was from her other side. Emmy, in the night, she had crawled out of her own cot and had burrowed between them. She was fast asleep, her face a picture of pure, fragile peace, her small hand splayed on Elias's chest. Clara smiled. She looked at Elias. He was watching the child. His face, his scarred, rough face, softened with a look of such profound, protective love that it took Clara's breath away. He had survived. They had survived. This was what they had survived for. He turned his head, his eyes meeting Clara's. He saw her watching him. He smiled. It was a slow, real smile, one that reached his eyes. She remembered her plea, the one that had started it all. The desperate, terrified whisper in the thunder. "Please don't leave me like he did." Elias leaned over the sleeping child. He kissed Clara's forehead. He kissed her nose. He kissed her, gently, on the mouth. "I'm not him," he whispered, his voice a promise, a vow, a fact. "I'm not leaving. Thank you for listening to this story. We'd love to hear from you. Please comment and let us know where you're listening from. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West so you don't miss any of our tales. And please, share your thoughts in English in the comments below.